yellow heart.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, your host for the program, which is produced with support from MD Coaches, a company dedicated to developing and empowering physicians to realize a greater potential and achieve a greater level of satisfaction in their chosen fields. You can find MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com. Well, I'm very excited today to be sharing an interview that I did with Dr. Jeffrey Jensen, who is currently professor, as well as the Associate Dean of the Arizona School of Podiatric Medicine at Midwestern University in Glendale, Arizona. Dr. Jensen has been an active researcher throughout his career and has been the principal investigator for over 30 multicenter trials for wound-related drugs and medical devices. He has generated more than $5 million in research grants from the National Institutes of Health, the U.S. Department of Defense, and a number of different state organizations. His research has resulted in 11 patents for products related to diabetic foot wounds, fractures, and infections. In 2000, Dr. Jensen founded a medical device company, MedEfficiency, that created the TCC-EZ, which is a total contact casting system for offloading the diabetic foot to promote healing of diabetic neuropathic ulcers. In addition to his current position, he has had a number of faculty appointments at other universities, and in 2017, he was inducted as a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons in Glasgow. Dr. Jensen joined me for this interview in the early summer of 2019. So now, let's listen to that conversation. Well, Dr. Jensen, I could go on, of course. Your resume is very impressive and very lengthy, but for right now, I'd just like to say thank you very much for taking the time to be with us, and welcome to Prescription for Success.
Thank you, Dr. Cook. It's an honor to be here. I look forward to helping our young practitioners in any way I can, and hopefully my journey will share some insights on what they can do to be successful in the future. And
likewise, I and they are looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And before we go any further, I'm just going to go ahead and say, I've known you for a long time. We've known each other for a long time. And with your permission, I will call you Jeff. And likewise, I would like for you to call me Randy. And this will feel a lot more like the real thing. Is that okay with you?
Sounds good, Randy. Let's get started.
Okay. So to get us underway, Jeff, what I would like you to do is just tell us a little bit about your beginnings. Was podiatry on your radar early in your life, or is that something that evolved later on?
Well, my initial experience with podiatry was in Madison, Wisconsin, where I grew up. And there was a podiatrist in Madison who was the podiatrist to all the running community. And during the running booms, a lot of runners were having knee pain, foot pain, and he was the go-to guy. And people would fly from all over the country to see him, to have orthotics made, be evaluated, so that they could continue to run high mileage and participate in marathon. It also just happened to be that my mother had bunions and hammer toes and neuromas, and he surgically corrected all of her foot challenges over the years. So that was my introduction to podiatry. When I went to school and I was working towards a master's degree in exercise physiology, I was taking all the advanced science courses, and I found that they came fairly straightforward. And I revisited kind of my career aspirations, and I got to know other podiatrists. And ultimately, I went back and shadowed, his name was Dr. Edward Hummel in Madison. And the next thing I knew, I was applying to podiatry school. And I moved up to San Francisco with my wife in 1987 and started my professional journey.
And how did you happen to pick San Francisco? That's a long way from Madison.
Uh, it was when I was doing my research back then on the different schools and opportunities in podiatric medicine. They had a tremendous background in biomechanics and sports medicine, and I really thought that was the direction my career was going to take, and it did in many ways. But they had a tremendous reputation in that regard, and I wanted to go there to get the best training I could.
So you get yourself established, and what was it like then? What were your first years like as a young podiatrist? What sort of things were you involved in? Were you in research all the way back at the beginning, or is that something that came later?
Well, I think one of the evolution of understanding what a podiatrist does and our scope of practice led me down a path of looking at diabetic patients. It was astounding to me as a student that diabetes could have such a profound effect on a patient's life, not only their eyes and kidneys, but also their feet. And it was amazing that they would have no feeling and they could step on a nail and not feel it, and they would get infected. This could create tremendous challenges. So when I was applying for residency programs coming out of school, I was looking for opportunities where not only would it be a great surgical opportunity for training, where I could be exposed to the diabetic foot in a multidisciplinary setting where we could really make a significant difference in patients' lives and save limbs. So when I finished my training, I was seeking an opportunity as a young doctor to utilize that training in a multidisciplinary fashion. And I ended up going to Denver, Colorado, and joining a practice that did a tremendous amount of wound healing research and had less of a practice component. And the idea was that I would come into this practice and build the practice, continue the research, and truly make a difference in patients' lives and hopefully be successful in the process. And it was a tremendous opportunity. And one of my mentors, his name is Garrett Mulder, brought me into that situation and taught me a tremendous amount about wound care and really opened my eyes into the various aspects of wound care that had not really been addressed on a large scale. So one thing led to another, and I was doing clinical trials. Some of the clinical trials back in the 90s were on the very products and bioengineered tissues that we use today, such as Apligraft and Dermagraft. So I was kind of in the wound care space in those early days of advanced technologies, which made it very exciting.
So at that point in your career, were you actually involved with training other podiatry students at that time?
Early on, for the first year or two, I was not, but there's an excellent residency program in Denver, Colorado at Presbyterian St. Luke's Hospital. And I did have the opportunity to participate as faculty, and I had the residents rotating through my office and participating in surgeries with me. And then it wasn't until about 1998 that, as Denver continued to grow, having that one surgical residency program for all the doctors in the community wasn't really meeting everybody's needs. So we started our own residency and based it out of Greeley, Colorado. And in doing that, I became the research director and I became the clerkship director, which meant I had the opportunity to bring students to our program from all 9 podiatry schools around the country for their 4th year audition rotations. So for 10 to 12 years during that period, I had the tremendous opportunity of working with students and from all the different schools. And then we had the opportunity to bring them in as residents and see them grow from a first-year resident in the door where they could hardly suture to leaving as a 3rd-year resident doing significant reconstructive surgeries and limb salvage. And it was very gratifying to see them go through that growth.
Yeah, it sounds like that you discovered something at that point in your life that sharing your knowledge and helping mentor young people with similar interests was something that was really rewarding for you. Is that right?
Well, it was not only rewarding for me, but it was rewarding for our entire team we assembled to start the residency program. It's amazing to watch young people grow with their skill sets, and it truly did make a big difference. And actually, that experience led me to ultimately applying for a full-time academic position because I was used to working with 4th-year students and then 1st, 2nd, and 3rd-year residents. but the opportunity to go into academics within a podiatry school environment offered me the opportunity to make an impact, from the interview process of students coming into podiatry school all the way through the 4 years and then getting them in.
And that next academic appointment was where?
It was at Barry University in Florida. I was introduced to that by the director of our residency program, who'd been a graduate of Barry University.
So now you've actually gone from coast to coast. That's very impressive.
It was coast to coast. It was a tremendous opportunity, and actually, to be honest, when I put my application in, I didn't know where I would stack up in terms of my resume and my experiences in terms of applying for a dean position at one of the podiatry schools. But as my wife would say, be careful what you ask for, you might get it. So the next thing I know, I was flying to Miami. I was interviewing for the position. It was just a tremendous opportunity. I could envision doing more research. I could envision having more access to funds through the NIH or the Department of Defense, all while giving back to the profession. So our family made a very significant decision in 2010 to move down to Miami, assume that position as the dean, and it was one of the best decisions I've made in my career for sure.
Well, that's good news. I'm sure it was very rewarding for you. Tell me a little bit about the TCC Easy. Was that, tell us how that came about.
Well, I had an idea. I was trained utilizing total contact casts when I was a resident, and I was under the impression that everybody used total contact cast because they had 7 randomized controlled trials that showed that there was a healing of 88% of the patients that go into a casting regimen, and the healing time was only on an average 42 days.
And so Jeff, if you'll let me just interrupt you for a moment. We have a fairly heterogeneous audience, and I suspect that there are people who may have never heard of total contact casting, may have never had any experience with neuropathic ulcers of the foot. So why don't you tell us just a little bit about that so we understand exactly what you were aiming for?
Oh, absolutely. So patients with diabetes, if they have neuropathy and no feeling in their feet, they run the risk of developing wounds on the plantar aspect of the foot. The wounds don't hurt, so the patients aren't motivated necessarily to be off their feet. And what ultimately happens is these patients can become infected. And of all the diabetic foot ulcers in this country, 50% of them do become infected. And 20% of that population undergoes an amputation at some point. So it's incumbent upon us as doctors of wounds to see these wounds early in the process. And if we can get them under appropriate care, we can get them to heal before they go down this path of infection, hospitalization, amputation, and rehabilitation. So the whole goal of total contact casting is to allow a patient to ambulate and heal at the same time. And because we're protecting that wound, if we're treating a patient that has an adequate perfusion or blood supply, and there's no current infection, we can heal them in a very quick process utilizing total contact casts. So the data supports, as I mentioned before, almost 90% healing in 4 days. So one of my goals was to develop a cast that anybody could use. The total contact casting regimen the years gone by were a 14-step process, and they used plaster and fiberglass. And it was almost more of a arts and crafts experience as opposed to just seeing a patient saying, yes, this patient needs a total contact cast.
And very time consuming, I'm thinking.
Yeah, some studies showed that it was up to 45 minutes per application. And that time is money in this world, and sometimes patients also didn't want to wear the casts, and not a lot of clinicians were trained in the nuances of putting on casts to minimize any other complications. So one of my goals was to develop a cast that anybody could use that would work just as well as a traditional total contact cast. In that process, I had the tremendous opportunity to work with a doctor named Paul Brand. Dr. Paul Brand is considered the father of diabetic foot care, and he treated many patients as a missionary in India who also had neuropathic feet secondary to Hansen's disease or leprosy. And when he came to the United States, he brought a total contact casting philosophy for neuropathic patients that extended beyond the leprosy patient into the diabetic foot realm. And the mechanisms by which these patients would heal, if we could get the pressure off the wound, was tremendous, because in the face of a good blood supply and no infection, we can protect that wound. So in working with Dr. Brand, I was able to apply for some NIH grants to develop a new total contact cast. And one thing led to another, and I coupled that with a grant that I applied for and received from the Department of Defense that was designed to function as an exosplint to help soldiers in the field if they were injured. For example, if they were to jump out of a helicopter and fracture their ankle, I helped them develop a device that would help self-rescue a soldier. So I took the technologies that we were developing in the NIH grants for diabetic foot ulcers, and we merged the technology that we developed for the Department of Defense for a wounded, injured soldier, and we married them. And with a tremendous engineering team at my little company, Medefficiency, we were able to develop what became the TCCEZ. And that was launched in 2007. And today it is by far and away the most utilized total contact casting system in our country. And it's used all over the world also. And it's been very gratifying, not only to help heal patients myself in the clinic, but to help other doctors heal their patients also.
And what is it that you would say that has made the TCCEZ so popular?
Well, we kind of built it into the name. It's easy to apply. It's a roll-on casting system that is a mesh, and the mesh will adapt to the size of the foot, the ankle, and the lower leg as you roll it on. And one of the tenets of how total contact casts work is they lock the ankle at 90 degrees, and they redistribute ground pressures away from the bottom of the foot into the cone of the leg. And in doing so, you minimize ground pressures on the wound site, but probably more importantly, you minimize shearing forces on the wound. Because as these wounds heal from the periphery, as you know, they're very fragile and they're very susceptible to any form of trauma, reversing that healing process that's occurring. So the cast truly enables the patient to heal, protects the wound site, all while enabling them to do activities of daily living, which I think is important, because you just can't render a patient to bed rest and expect that to work, because they still have to get up and go to the bathroom or get something to eat.
Well, I'm going to suggest that, we knew total contact casting was very effective at healing diabetic foot ulcers, but having used the TCCEZ myself, I think the big significance and the thing that is probably what led to the popularity is that it is so efficient. I've used the device myself in my own practice, and I know that it reduces the time required to put on a cast from, as you say, up to 45 minutes down to about 10 or 15. It is really a remarkable piece of equipment, and you are to be congratulated for coming up with that plan.
I appreciate that, Randy, but in reality, I was just part of a great team. We had tremendous people working on the project, and yeah, maybe it was my idea and the whole vision, but I'll tell you what, you learn quickly when you're doing product development. Nobody does anything on their own. You know how that goes.
So very true. So moving on a little bit, Jeff, I'd like to hear a little bit about more personal things. I'm interested to know, in your own professional journey, were there any particular surprises along the way? Did anything catch you by surprise, so that if you could go back and do it over again, you would change things?
Well, surprises in a good way. I think maybe it's beneficial to talk about that. I think as we all are so engrossed in school, and we're taking MCATs, and then you get into the medical education program and you do the basic sciences for 2 years, and then you get into the clinical realm. It takes so long to become proficient at any of our specialties that sometimes you lose sight of the fact that there's going to be lots of other areas where one can go and opportunities that might arise. So I had no idea where my career was going to go early on. I just wanted to be the best doctor I could be. I wanted to help patients. I wanted to, save limbs, for example, and do lots of surgeries to help patients. And I was astounded when I realized there was a world of research. Then I was introduced into the world of NIH grants. And then I was introduced into the world of product development. So I think one of the surprises for me was the tremendous opportunities that were there, that kind of presented themselves at different times in my career that I never could have predicted. Some of the surprises, like all doctors, you realize over time that you are in a hospital physician group delivery system. I was always very, very very pleased with the level of cooperation between physicians, whether it's in the ICU or on the floor in the emergency department. None of that was a surprise to me because I experienced that when I was training. I think some of the insurance contracting things were a little bit of a surprise to me early on. I found a niche, though, in diabetic foot care where insurance companies were spending a tremendous amount of money on patients. And one medical director shared with me that if you went back to the inception of a wound through the infection, amputation, and prosthetic, it was a $75,000 bill. And that was a shock to me because it opened my eyes to the fact that my abilities to treat a patient and put a team to meet the patient's needs together could dramatically decrease the cost of care for these patients, which was just a bonus on top of increasing a patient's quality of life by treating them appropriately. So I was able at one point, and this was a surprise to me, to interface directly with insurance companies to do risk contracts that were designed very similar to how we designed clinical trials, where I had inclusion and exclusion criteria for going at risk. So, for example, a patient on dialysis, I wouldn't necessarily want to go at risk for. A patient with profound peripheral vascular disease that could not be corrected, I didn't want to go at risk for. But if you brought a patient with a neuropathic foot wound with a good blood supply, there's no reason for that patient to go down a path where they get infected and admitted to the hospital. Intercede early, and that's where I found a little bit of a niche with insurance companies. So there's ways around things always, of course. It takes a little bit of creative thought. But by and large, when I think about surprises in a bad way, I think I've been able to, with colleagues, of course, and with associations and our peers, we've been able to find ways to make it work for the benefit of the patient and also for the benefit of the physicians. And while I realize that's not always 100% true, I found in my career so far I've been able to navigate those storms.
It sounds a little bit like you are one of those very fortunate people who never really sees problems. You see opportunities. Would that describe you?
Well, I think that's true. You got to acknowledge the problem before you can come up with an opportunity, though. So yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
Well, Jeff, I've really enjoyed chatting with you today about your career. You've had a very interesting and so far very successful journey. But what I'd like to do right now is go ahead and get into my very favorite part of the show, and that's where we invite our guests to share some personal advice with us. So if you're ready, we'd like to hear your personal prescription for success.
Thank you, Randy. Well, here are my 4 pieces of advice I would give to my younger self or students and residents coming up through the ranks. Number 1, your family comes first. If you can't address your family's needs, nothing else really matters. Number 2, strive to be significant in your specialty. Nobody can become significant in their field without passion. It will allow you to treat your patients to the very best of your ability. And realize this isn't that romantic feel-good theory of do something you love and you'll never work a day in your life. In fact, it's quite the opposite. If you find passion in what you do, you'll be more committed, you'll work harder, you'll do more research, write more grants, invent new products, give more lectures. The list goes on and on. So there's a big difference between being successful and being significant. Strive to be significant. Number 3, work outside of your comfort zone. Not all of the time, but when you need to. This could be described as your work situation. There will be changes in medicine during your career. There will be opportunities you'll need to make the most of, and there will be challenges and obstacles you never anticipated. Be open to change and new things. Surround yourself with smart people with diverse talent and people you want to work with. Number 4, find your non-work outlet. Again, find your passion. It might be reading or playing chess, volunteering, fishing, or golf. For me, it's been different things throughout my career, from rock climbing to running to shooting sporting clays competitively. You don't want to become your job. This is the time when your battery recharges so that you can do your best work. All of this advice could be construed as paradoxical, and I realize this, so I wanted to finish with my favorite quote credited to James Michener. Here's the quote. "The master in the art of living makes little distinction between his work and his play, his labor and his leisure, his mind and his body, his education and his recreation, his love and his religion. He hardly knows which is which. He simply pursues his vision of excellence at whatever he does, leaving others to decide whether he is working or playing. To him, he is always doing both." That pretty much summarizes my recipe for success, Randy.
Well, Jeff, thank you very much for sharing that with us. That's some really well thought out advice that you've offered for us today, and we really enjoyed hearing about your professional journey so far. So thank you again for being here. And before we go, I'd like to give you an opportunity to share some contact information for us. If you have email addresses, social media contacts, or anything that you'd like to pass on to our audience to help them get in touch with you, please let us know.
Well, thank you. As the director of the Arizona School of Podiatric Medicine, we have a Facebook page, Arizona School of Podiatric Medicine. You can always reach me there, or you can email me, and my email is jjensen1@midwestern.edu. That's jjensen1@midwestern.edu. I sure appreciate the opportunity to participate with you, Randy.
Well, thanks again for being here, Jeff. We've really enjoyed it. And with that, it's time to bring this episode of Prescription for Success to a close. You can review the show notes and gather a little more background information about my guest at our podcast website, rxforsuccesspodcast.com. And while you're there, please subscribe. If you enjoy our program and would like to help spread the word, just take a screenshot of your phone while you're listening and post that picture to your favorite social media platforms using the hashtag RxForSuccessPodcast. We appreciate your support very much. Thanks again for listening, and don't forget to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.